Today on the show, we took your questions and we were convinced into trying spice beer. Turns out it's fucking disgusting and just for tourists. Ugh. This is a mailbag episode.
Welcome to God Emperor, your guide to the iconic world of Dune. We'll be exploring the themes, philosophies, and characters found in the sandy depths of this vast universe, from Frank Herbert's groundbreaking novels to the adaptations on film and TV. My name's Abu.
My name is Leo.
And folks,
Yes.
It's mailbag time.
Yes, it is.
It's been a while since we've done one of these, but we've had a bunch of new listeners these last couple of months, and all of those listeners have been sending us these wonderful emails full of great thoughts and observations, and most relevant to today, questions, which we will be tackling on today's episode.
Indeed, we will. Now, for housekeeping today, let's talk about spoilers, because today's conversation will contain spoilers through God Emperor of Dune. Mm-hmm. And you're like, oh no, what am I supposed to do? Read the first 4 books of Dune?
Yes.
Yeah, do that. Luckily, we made it easy. We made a book club series for you. So you can read along with our company all the way through God Emperor of Dune, and then you'll be set to listen to today's episode.
That's right. And of course, at the top of the show, a huge shout out to our Kwisatz Haderach level patrons, Case Aiken, Daniel, Dion, Roman, Caballo, Jonathan, Lambert, and C.R. Spruill. My goodness. Instead of bags of mail, these folks have been sending us bags of money, I guess, through their generosity as supporters on Patreon. And this show, frankly, doesn't operate without folks supporting us in this way. Our immense gratitude to our Kwisatz Haderach level patrons, but also to all of our patrons at every level who help sustain this show, help pay those bills, and help us keep creating great content. Thank you so much for making God Emperor possible.
Thank you. Now, today's episode, here's how it's going to work. This is a mailbag, so you know the drill. We got messages via Discord and email, carrier pigeon, distrans, bat, smoke signals. Those were hard to decode, though they were eventually decoded. We're going to tackle a bunch of those today. And listen, folks, if your question didn't make it in today's episode, never fear. We sprinkle in mailbags like this regularly throughout the year. And certainly, when we get your emails, we do sometimes just try to answer them in the moment.
That's right.
Okay, before we get into our first questions, we're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere, dear listener. You've just listened to the worst part of the episode. The best part of the episode's coming up right after this.
It's only up from here.
It's all uphill from here.
Welcome back, folks. Let's do it. Let's crack open these messages and answer some questions today.
Yeah.
Starting with an email from Elizabeth Burlington. Elizabeth wrote, quote, "What I'd really like to know is whether anyone in Dune history ever tried to expand spice production to other planets or to develop other ways to cultivate it. Have people tried and failed? Is it an environmental issue? It seems a bit short-sighted to limit production of an absolutely essential substance to one place." End quote.
Yeah. Great question.
Uh-huh.
And also, yes. Yep, people have tried. This is a question that I think a lot of moviegoers are probably wondering to themselves, because you're sitting in a theater going, holy shit, this stuff is so valuable. All this stuff is happening.
Yep.
Why? Why not make it somewhere else? And while the film doesn't touch on that question, it is the fact that spice can only be produced on Arrakis, at least right now. And although many people have tried to reproduce it artificially or naturally, they've all failed.
Yes.
And they failed for likely 2 key reasons. First, the ecology of the planet is very specific. This harsh desert world, perfect for a sand-based ore. Can't get spice on Caladan.
No,
That planet's
no.
wet as shit. And because there's a connection between the sandworms and spice that I will emphasize fucking nobody knows.
Yeah.
This is the thing.
That's big.
At 10,191 AG, the Imperium does not know that there is a direct connection between the sandworms and the spice. So you say, oh, we're going to go make spice. You idiots. You don't even know where spice comes from.
Yep.
How are you going to do that? So they've tried, but that is obviously a huge hurdle that stops it from becoming a successful venture.
Absolutely. And actually, to dig a little bit deeper into this idea, what you're already getting at here, Leo, in the first book, we learn that the life cycle of these sandworms is closely tied to the creation of the spice. And I say we, because we, the reader, learn it. To your point, not everyone in the Imperium just makes this discovery and understands that worm life cycle equals spice production. This is actually a big revelation that Paul in particular learns, and that Liet Kynes had been studying for many years and was maybe on the cusp of discovering. So we, the reader, understand by the time the first book ends that the worms are the only natural way to create the spice melange. They are tied one to the other. And more specifically, when you look in the Dune Encyclopedia and learn about the sandworm life cycle, we're told that the sand trout, which is this like pre-sandworm larval form,
Pre-evolution,
in the life cycle of a sandworm. This is Caterpie, right? If we're talking Pokemon terms, we're not at Butterfree yet. Yeah. We are still at Caterpie. Sand trout travel across the desert to find sources of water under the sand, wherever they may be at the polar regions, and they absorb this water and bring it back to their nesting sites. This water then mixes with their excretions, basically, at these nesting sites, their poop. And this forms the pre-spice mass deep under the sand. And this chemical reaction of the water mixing with the excretions builds up an enormous amount of pressure underground. Eventually, this pre-spice mass then blows. And we see this firsthand in the first book, in the chapter where Liet Kynes dies in the explosion as a spice blow explodes underneath him. And the Dune Encyclopedia explains that, quote, all of the products of the pre-spice mass were brought to the surface of the sand, where the action of sun and air rapidly changed the pre-spice to melange, end quote.
Right, yeah.
So there again, you can see sort of the ecology of the planet play a factor in turning the pre-spice into melange.
Yeah. Like I imagine like a humidity difference in the air would probably fuck this whole process up, right?
Exactly. Something as subtle as humidity difference, or probably something as subtle as just the composition of the air itself might not properly change pre-spice into actual spice.
Or the fucking sun, right? We've got different types of suns, different light spectrums, different things. So there's a lot to get right.
Absolutely. Yeah, the ecology plays an important role in creating spice, and Arrakis has that perfect mix. There's also the history of Arrakis to consider, because before it was a desert planet, Arrakis was actually a lush and wet planet itself.
Yeah, it's true.
And when the sandworms arrived, they basically, to overly simplify it, they like sucked the planet dry across eons of ecological transformation and evolution.
Right.
And so if you are trying to, let's say, transplant one of these sandworms to another planet, you cannot just take them to another desert planet.
Right.
The only natural way to recreate the natural melange sandworm life cycle is to take the sandworms to another equally lush and wet planet that Arrakis used to be, and allow for eons of natural evolution to take place.
Yeah.
And hope that it works out in the same way that Arrakis did. And again, to really kind of round all of this out, as you stated earlier, none of this is common knowledge. None of what we are explaining right now is discovered in the Imperium for thousands of years.
Right, yeah.
After the first book. The Dune Encyclopedia itself is an in-universe document that's written thousands of years after the events of God Emperor of Dune. And that's when people understand this very tight, delicate balance and relationship between the ecology of Arrakis and the life cycle of the sandworms and how that creates melange. So inevitably, it is very tough to recreate and to do naturally.
I think Arrakis being a lush water planet before the introduction of sand trout to Arrakis
Yeah.
is something that Leto knows from his other memory.
Yes.
I would have to check, but I don't even recall if that's something that's in the Dune Encyclopedia because it's just covered in Dune. So it's also possible that even at the time of the Dune Encyclopedia being written, most people don't even know that the planet was that lush planet in the ancient history.
Right. That's a thing that perhaps only Leto 2 has access to because of his other memory.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wild.
Great point.
Well, then the alternative, of course, is like, okay, it's complicated as shit to make it on a planet. Understood. All right. Stop yelling at me. So instead, let's try making it in a lab, right? Like that's the alternative. We'll make artificial spice. This is excellent. Science solves all, right? And the answer here is pretty simple. It's complicated.
Oh, no.
Chemically complex. It's really hard to do. And even like if you're looking at real world examples today, we currently fail at creating artificial things all the time. I mean, like creating artificial recreations of natural proteins and chemical compounds and different like molecular bonds. Sometimes it works and sometimes it just straight up doesn't. Yeah. And not only is it hard to do on a small scale, doing something in a cost-effective, scalable, and safe method, also, difficult. I'll point out spice taken a certain way out of the sandworm creates a deadly poison that kills you.
Correct.
So that's the target you're trying to hit. You're like, let's create this. Oh, I fucked up that carbon bridge on that. And then it's just a deadly poison and kills the whole staff. You're like, shit.
Right.
Hire some new scientists, I guess. Now, some groups, like the Tleilaxu and like the Ixians, attempted to create artificial spice, but basically like faced the same challenges that we do today with artificial food. They were not able to do it in a cost-effective or even an effective way.
Yeah.
I mean, we could kind of try to speculate why that is, but that simply is the case. The implication in God Emperor of Dune is that the Ixians are getting close to having an idea of maybe how to do it. We don't really get to see the fruits of that labor. And keep in mind, that's after the Ixians have been trying to tackle this problem for 3,000 years.
Correct.
So that's how hard it is. However hard that is, that's how hard it is.
Yep. Very.
Very. This is 4 stars at least. I was thinking difficulty. Difficulty is not really often in stars, is it?
No. I guess I think of it more in video game terms. That's
like I think of it like Grand Theft Auto when the police are after you. Like 4 stars is much harder than 3 and 5, but I realize like that might be the only example. So for anybody out there who thinks in GTA terms, you got it.
There you go. There you go. You got it.
Well, that was our first question. And again, thank you so much, Elizabeth. Excellent question. I'm sure other people were wondering and happy to talk about it. Our next question comes from, this is a twofer. This is exciting.
Yeah.
The first email is from Anais. And Anais writes, quote, "Do we know what was going on in Caladan in the period when the Duke was still alive but on Arrakis? Was there some sort of governor or steward taking care of the planet? I assume that some people stayed behind, right? Then, what happened after the Duke's downfall? Was Caladan awarded to another noble house, as it was assumed that both Leto and Paul had died?" End quote. Excellent question, outlining some really excellent, what ifs.
Yeah.
And similarly, we got an email from, I should say last names, it was Anais Garrigas and then Vince Giacono. Sorry, both of you, for mangling your names. Vince emailed us a similar question. Quote, "I had a question about the logistics of the move of House Atreides from Caladan to Arrakis. Does the population of the whole entire planet of Caladan move, or is it just the house and its council and military and whatever other necessities are part of Duke Leto's command? What about the rest of the population? Do they just stay on Caladan and chill out until a new member of the Lance Red takes over?" End quote.
Wow. Excellent questions. I'm
questions.
glad we got a little pair of questions here that kind of fit nicely together.
Yeah.
I want to say right off the bat, I have to correct the record. Anais, Vince, I emailed both of them back and gave them the wrong answer to this question because, full transparency, I didn't do my homework. I just assumed that I knew the answer, and I responded. And I told them that, yeah, like there was a governor on our Caladan that took care of things for Leto. That is wrong, because now that I have done my research and you actually caught me on this, we have a much clearer answer to this question. So a little healthy reminder for all of us to always check yourself before you wreck yourself.
Yeah.
And never make assumptions.
That's an original Abu saying, by the way. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. That's right. You can quote me. I'll also say, this is a reminder. If we say something that's wrong, email us. Tell us. We are the first people who want to know, and we are more than happy to go back and correct what we said. Naturally, there are things that are a little bit more amorphous, like you said Alia's powers are this, and actually, I think they're that. We don't care about that. But if there's like a factual thing that we fucked up, let us know, please.
Right. Yeah, definitely. After 4 years of doing this, we know a lot about Dune, but we certainly can never know everything about Dune.
Right.
So call us out when we're wrong. So to set the record straight, let's get to the heart of Anais' question. What actually happened to Caladan? The answer here is that, if you recall, in the first book, we're told that the Atreides were given command to give up rule of Caladan and take full fiefdom of Arrakis. And the wording there is very important. Full fiefdom of Arrakis. Paul recalls, at the start of the first book, early on, how Thufir explained this political situation to him. Paul is thinking back, quote, "Their mortal enemies, the Harkonnens, had been on Arrakis 80 years, holding the planet in quasi-fief under a Chom Company contract to mine the geriatric spice Melange. Now the Harkonnens were leaving to be replaced by the House of Atreides in fief complete." End quote.
Yeah.
So there we see two different types of fiefs. There's a quasi-fief under this contract with Chom, which is sort of like the economic stock market exchange of the Dune Imperium. The Harkonnens were just there on a contract basis. They did not control the planet as its rulers. House Atreides, however, is getting a fief complete of Arrakis, and thus they are giving up control and rulership of Caladan and installing themselves as the governing house of Arrakis itself.
Which is, by the way, nuts. Like, this is why this political trap is so inescapable for Leto. You are being offered semi-permanent ownership of the most valuable planet in the universe.
Wild.
Unreal. Like, this is the planet that made, in just 75 years, 85 years, made House Harkonnen rich enough to be able to, like, secretly fly a bunch of Sardaukar shit via the Spacing Guild. Like, it's an unimaginable wealth that the Harkonnens were able to achieve in just 100 years. And you're like, oh, no, thousands of years, you're going to have this planet.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. Yeah.
Truly unbelievable. And again, they're under a Chom contract, so I'm sure House Harkonnen made those profits regardless of the fees that they were probably paying to Chom, the cuts that were being split there. This naturally leads to the question of Caladan, right? What happened to Caladan now that House Atreides has given up their fiefdom of it? We're told that Caladan then reverted back to the Emperor's control, actually. Mm-hmm. And our guy, Count Fenring,
love him,
was placed in charge of the planet.
Not even in the movie. Love him.
Not in the movie at all. So moviegoers are like, who?
Who the fuck?
Bookgoers know what's up.
Yep.
Count Fenring, our guy, is put in charge of Caladan once House Atreides makes the move. And this would have continued even after House Atreides was wiped out by the surprise Harkonnen Sardaukar attack. So Caladan would have simply stayed under the Emperor's rule and under Count Fenring's management across most of the story of the first book until the very end.
Right.
Now, of course, at the very end, Paul takes the throne and Shaddam's uncreased Nikes and presumably takes Caladan back as well. Caladan is thus returned to the Atreides, but as we know, Paul makes his capital, Arrakis. And so he sends Gurney Halleck and his mother back to Caladan to go rule in his stead.
To have Mai Tais on the beach.
That's right. A nice, easy retirement on the beaches of Caladan.
Yeah. Now, Vince's question has a little bit less of a clear-cut answer, but we are pretty confident in maybe postulating a little bit here that no, the entire planet doesn't move to Arrakis.
Right. Yeah.
Like the entire population of Caladan, all these like wet water city dwellers just like chilling. It's like, hey,
Can you imagine?
guys, we're all going. The planet's empty now. 0 humans. So
Right.
the very likely thing is this is akin to like a change of administration.
Yeah.
Like the head, top of organization people are swapping out. They're leaving. Fenring comes in and maybe appoints people once he gets there. But most people are just like, oh shit, wow, really? Our Duke is leaving the planet? Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I've got like a fishing quota to make. So I guess I'll go back to work then. Whoa, big deal. Crazy news.
Right.
Anyway, fishing time, it's like just because a new political party takes over doesn't mean everything grinds to a stop. The political infrastructure of Caladan actually probably also mostly remained the same. I think about this in terms of like, just because there's a new person in charge in many countries, they then have to like work with, oh, you are like maybe the head of the union of such and such, or you are the Department of Transportation, and maybe that doesn't change. And so I actually imagine quite a bit of Caladan stayed pretty static. And to Vince's question, and I like the way Vince worded it, yeah, indeed, like the military, the war council, the like key components of House Atreides, of course they went. Otherwise, probably pretty much everybody stayed.
Yep.
And of course, I'm sure there are like policy changes on Caladan, but not like an overhaul of the planet. And also Fenring's savvy. Fenring is probably the perfect person to send and do this. He'd be the person to say, we're not going to risk a revolt by like fucking up everything, especially because we know they loved their Duke. They just got the double whammy of him leaving and then dying. That sucks.
Right. No bans on fishing on a water planet, nothing like that.
Yeah. And we actually get to see that a little bit in the book because Duke Leto, upon arriving on Arrakis in Arrakeen, has to have this like schmoozy dinner banquet with all of the local power holders, basically. Someone shared a link of CPG Gray's video about rulers, how to rule, and they talked a lot about key holders. So like the key holders of society are all at this banquet, and it's up to Leto to kind of like woo them and get them to be okay with him being the new dog in town, so to speak.
Right. The bankers, the water sellers, all of the power players on Arrakis don't change.
Right.
And what does change is just who's in charge, aka the Atreides. So now it's up to Leto to come in and sort of wheel and deal with these people and fit into the political structure that already exists on Arrakis.
Yeah, and we see that he has aspirations to change things, like the throwing the water on the ground and having like slaves come and like lick it up or whatever the fuck. Like they clearly want to change that stuff, but they have to do it in a politically savvy way. And I think the same thing is then true for pretty much any time we have these like heads of houses being granted new planets, probably similar to that.
Like we've always said on this podcast, Dune is a story of the 1% of the 1% of people in the Imperium. We almost never actually are boots on the ground with the average Joe fishermans of the world. And so that's something to keep in mind. What we are reading and experiencing is characters who are at the top of society. And it's easy to imagine that a lot of the rest of the people in the Imperium like barely feel the ripples of these effects until huge things like an emperor gets deposed and a new emperor shows up.
I was going to say.
And maybe a jihad explodes.
Something like that. Yeah, just as a random example. Happens all the time. I was going to say, it's like, did you hear the Kardashians are moving out of LA? And you're like, oh my God, does everyone in LA have to leave with them? No.
Exactly. The rulers of LA.
The rulers of LA.
When they leave, the Kardashians, Yeah, that's a great example as well. Anais, Vince, thank you for the questions. I think genuinely this is something that I think a lot of moviegoers also would be wondering is what's going on with the politics of this universe when House Atreides moves and what happens to their original planet. So thank you for the great questions and for giving us the opportunity to dig a little deeper into this and for me to set the record straight. So please ignore what I write in the email.
It is a very easy to miss thing because like what we're talking about is a period of like 2 years, 2.5 years.
Yeah.
During which we're focused on all the shit happening on Arrakis. And it's not really talked about what's happening on Caladan. We don't get mention of Caladan until the end of the book where Paul fucking has it again. You have to dig into the specific verbiage of one sentence from Duke Leto explaining to Paul. It's like, it's totally, it's a very fair question. And I'm glad we got to talk about it.
Absolutely. Okay, next up, another email. This one is from Ryan O'Halloran. Ryan wrote, quote, I just rewatched part 2 and had a question for you both. During Paul's War Council speech, he mentions that Arrakis was once referred to by the Fremen as Dune when he speaks to the one Fremen about his grandmother. And then Ryan goes on in his email to basically ask, what the fuck is up with that?
Yeah.
And honestly, I'm going to take Ryan's side here. This caught me off guard. Like on every rewatch of the movie, I was like, what is Paul talking about here? From the book, as a book reader, it's not like a huge secret that Arrakis is nicknamed Dune because, desert dunes.
They're like, the native population calls it Dune.
Right. So it's not this like huge secret that only Paul, the Kwisatz Haderach, Lisan al-Gaib would ever know and reveal to this one Fremen in the Cave of Birds scene. In fact, plenty of characters in the book itself literally call the planet Dune rather than Arrakis. Plenty of non-Fremen characters also refer to it by Dune. So this caught me a little bit off guard, perhaps a movie change here, but in the Cave of Birds scenes, I didn't want to quote it exactly. Paul says specifically, quote, at the time, this world had a Fremen name.
Dune. Yeah.
End quote. And then music cue, music drop, and the Fremen is like, oh my God, Lisan al-Gaib.
Falls to his knees, yeah.
So it's played as this huge revelation, but as a book reader, I did find it a bit confusing why this would be some huge secret.
So the sense that I got here is that Denis made this a change, right? We don't have in the movie many examples of people using the term Dune, especially on planet. Yeah. People aren't like, oh, this is Dune. Everyone's like, this is Arrakis. Arrakis is, right. I think even Chani is like, my planet Arrakis is so beautiful when the sun is low, whatever. It's like, okay, using the imperial term for it, the government name of the planet doesn't sound very revolutionary of you, Chani. So I think this is a change that Denis made to maybe this is a shorthand. Paul knows some nearly forgotten Fremen stuff, old language that nobody uses, which cements that this isn't like word of mouth. He didn't just hear this from Chani one day. He's straight up spitting knowledge that many of them haven't heard in decades.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, this certainly does draw into question Baron's iconic line, my desert, my Arrakis, my Dune.
There it is.
And it's like, I'm sorry, does Baron know old Fremen secrets? What the fuck is happening? It seems a little bit messy. Needless to say, in the book, it's not a secret. It's not a big deal. In the movie, it's possible this was just sort of a kind of an interesting convergence of editing and performance where it's not that it's the word Dune that freaks the dude out. It's just this is the cumulative effect of Paul's speech. He's like, grandmother lost her eye. This happened exactly then she died and blah, blah, blah. And this was called Dune. Right. And he's like, oh my God, he's done talking. Lisan al-Gaib,
Yeah. Great.
Rather than that last word was the nail in the coffin. Maybe it was just the whole thing was so overwhelming. I don't know. It does feel like he said the name of the movie, and I think that...
Right. That's what I mean. On a meta level, it kind of feels like they wanted a dramatic movie name drop in there somewhere. So they just had Paul say, Dune.
Dune. It's like...
Right at the camera, roll credits.
Yeah. At that time, the Fremen had a different name. Something that the Fremen think, Dune. It was like, was so subtle. My
Danny
God.
Villeneuve, masterpiece storyteller. Denny hates dialogue, but Villeneuve. Yeah. This one certainly, I've kind of just ignored this in my mind because I love the rest of the movie so much. But this felt weird. It felt out of place, and I can't really come up with an explanation. I like your theory. Perhaps this is something that was changed for the film to make Dune more of a secret. But as a book reader, it's just like so much not a secret that it's hard for me to wrap my head around this change. And especially the fact that the Baron literally says Dune in the first
part.
movie kind of pokes a hole in that too. So who knows?
Yeah, it's bizarre. But whatever.
Yeah.
Great question, Ryan.
Yes,
Hopefully
thank
that
you, Ryan.
helps. Hopefully that entertains.
Yeah.
If not,
We really didn't answer that question, but I guess I'm just kind of siding with Ryan here. I'm like, yeah, man, I'm in the same boat as you.
yeah. It's like, okay, so yeah, we've talked about how it is in the book. Okay, yeah, for sure. Ryan, hope that helps. Now we're going to take a quick break here. Don't go anywhere. We've got a bunch of great questions coming up. We'll be right back.
Welcome back, folks. Let's continue digging through our mailbag questions here. Next up, we have a two-part email from Kwisatz Haderach patron himself, Roman Caballo. Roman asks, quote, how much spice intake is needed, I assume on a daily basis for best results, to begin reaping the longer life rewards? I do remember you mentioning that the more spice you take, the longer you live, end quote.
What a great question that Roman asked us in March of 2023.
Oh my God. We're recording this May of 2024.
Yeah. So it's been a good 14 months. And this was also, I think this was in the email where Roman was like, hey, I just became a patron for the first time. And it's so lovely. And we're so sorry, Roman. We're sorry to There were a few emails that we pulled that were from a little over a year. I think we have to start saying now we're going to respond within 2 years. I think that's the...
Right. We got to expand the window a little bit.
Yeah. But...
the emails, they just keep growing.
You know, it's true. We will do our best. I was also just thinking maybe we do a mailbag where we just read the emails and give our like partial shitty answers and just do our best just to like clean the slate. I don't know. Maybe. Anyway, to Roman's question, how much spice is needed? I feel like we talked about this at some point, whether it was in a morsel or maybe the spice episode, if we did one of those.
We did. So long ago.
So long ago.
We did. Like probably 4 years ago now. We did a spice episode.
Oh my God. So how much spice is needed to have longer life? Well, we have to break this into two pieces. There's becoming addicted to spice, which is where the spice is having like a very measurable chemical effect on your system. The Dune Encyclopedia explains, quote, if quantities in excess of 2 grams daily per 70 kilograms of body weight are ingested, severe addiction is encountered, end quote. So 70 kilograms is about 150 pounds. So that's, if your average body weight's 150, 2 grams, not a lot. I feel like there's, 30 grams of sugar in a bag of Skittles? Like, not a crazy amount.
Yeah.
But then how much specifically is needed for the life-extending properties to kick in? Well, the Dune Encyclopedia is a little vague here, but says, quote, the addict's predicted lifespan is increased 2 to 4 times that of normal, depending on the age at which the spice was first ingested, as well as the dose, end quote.
Interesting.
So it's kind of saying it depends, but it does make it clear the addict is the one who is having this benefit of the lifespan increase. So you have to become addicted. Doesn't have to be severe addiction, perhaps, but maybe that severe addiction is also what leads to longer lifespan. So there you go. You have to be addicted.
Yeah.
You got to be addicted to
That's
spice.
interesting. I do wonder, again, that spice episode was so long ago. I'd have to go back and re-listen to exactly what we said in it and perhaps what things we theorized, but I don't recall anywhere in the books or anywhere in my reading of the Dune Encyclopedia mentioning that more spice equals more life. I don't know that that's necessarily the case.
It may not be, no.
So if we did say that, perhaps we were theorizing, or maybe we were just plain out wrong back in that episode. I don't think that's the case. I'm not referencing any facts here or any lore. This is me theorizing, sort of headcanon. But I imagine spice is sort of, there's a tipping point and then it starts having the opposite effect. So like any other drug would. Like too much spice is probably going to be detrimental to your body. Too little and you don't reap the rewards. There's like a middle ground where you're addicted. Perhaps it is this 2 grams per 70 kilograms of body weight. But once you hit that middle ground, you reap the rewards and your lifespan is extended and you're immune to poisons and you get the health benefits, all of that stuff. But I imagine you can't just like keep taking more spice to keep living infinitely.
No,
I don't
of course
think that's
not.
how that works.
No, yeah. I think and then actually now looking at the exact wording, the 2 to 4 times that of normal, it says it's depending on the age at which the spice was first ingested. So it's not the quantity, it's when they became addicted, as well as the dose.
Yeah. I imagine like as a younger person, if you took spice, it kind of just, you maintain your younger, healthier body longer, perhaps, you know?
Yeah,
like,
aging is...
Again, this is my headcanon, but maybe like if you took spice too late in your life, like your body is already deteriorated and aged to a point where you reap fewer benefits.
Yeah.
But again, it's very unclear.
It is.
The 2 quotes we just shared are basically the extent to which the encyclopedia gets into spice addiction and its benefits.
Yeah, true. Well, the second part of his question is a little bit more involved.
Yeah.
Quote, unless we are talking about a very small quantity needed to extend your life 3 times normal, I would think that it would be prohibitively expensive for the common citizen of the Imperium to knock back a bunch of spice beers on a daily basis like our favorite Emperor Elrude. Awesome. Yeah. On the other hand, we must also remember that Duncan showed up at the palace drunk from spice beer after night out with the boys. I mean, he was in a mindset to say, fuck it, and blow his entire paycheck on spice beer that evening, but something doesn't add up. Is it possible that spice is way cheaper on Arrakis because it comes from there? End quote.
Economics, baby.
Economics, baby. Yeah, excellent question and excellent points.
Yeah. So this naturally requires some theory from us because once again, no clear-cut answer in the lore. Duke Leto didn't turn to the camera at any point and go, wow, spice beer sure is cheaper on this planet because there's so much spice on Iraq. You know, like there's no...
If only Brian Herbert had written Dune, we would have gotten that subtle and explanatory exposition dump.
That's true. So we don't have a clear-cut answer to Roman's question, but again, we can connect the dots of what we do know and then maybe build some theory off of it.
We do have a cork board and some push pins and some red yarn.
Yes, let's connect some red yarn here. Roman makes some great points about the price of spice. As we know, spice is extremely expensive and extremely rare in the Imperium. And to Roman's point, yeah, it would probably be too expensive for the average citizen of the Imperium to afford on a regular basis. As we know from the first book, a quote that we've referenced many times, Duke Leto tells us that a handful of spice could buy a house on Tupil.
Right. Now, the thing that I would jump in here and distinguish is the more I thought about this, and as we were kind of answering this question in the script, the more I realized people are fucking throwing around the word spice all the goddamn time, not being specific at all. So I think it's important we take a second and distinguish between like spice, spice essence, aka maybe, and again, even that's a little bit vague, processed spice, like refined spice. So spice is the word everyone's fucking talking about all the goddamn time. But if we are distinguishing these terms and being very clear with what we're talking about, this could be the raw spice ore, the sand spice ore you find in the sand, as well as the food in the air and all that stuff. It's like the unprocessed material. And again, at this point, maybe just ignore what characters say. We have to say this is the unprocessed spice. Now that spice is gathered by the factories, spice harvester factories, and processed. From the Dune Encyclopedia, quote, the spice factory was a separator of spice and spice byproducts from impurities and a storage transport for those products. End quote. So in other words, when you say spice, You're on Caladan and you're talking about spice. You're on Portra and you're talking about spice. What you are talking about is the processed, refined, and pure product that is a byproduct of the factories making it.
Yeah.
So kind of a real world analogy might be like, yeah, tar or crude oil is one material, but you got to do a bunch of shit to it to make petroleum, the like pure and very expensive substance. The price point for each is very different. And that's the kind of first thing that I wanted to drive home here.
True.
So Duke Leto says in the first book, quote, "Spice is in everything here. You breathe it and eat it in almost everything," end quote. He is not talking about the petroleum, pure, refined drug that will make you addicted after 2 grams of ingestion. This is the material spice, the unprocessed raw spice. And I think this is where a huge difference is made. Also, because there are things like fucking spice beer. You have like tons of this sand and then you've boiled it down to just a little vial of blue liquid. Do we expect that is going into the vats to make some spice beer? Or, hear me out, in the same way that we have spice fibers and material plastics made of spice, is this a spice byproduct that is not nearly as expensive as the spice that we're all talking about? And it is still made from things that are in spice, but it's like the runoffs, right? I just went to some whiskey distilleries in Scotland and I got to see the process of like you have this like mash fluid and then you heat it and you do all this shit to it. But the process of distilling it, you end up with chunks of liquid that's not as useful, and they often give that to like to use in fertilizer and stuff like that. Maybe spice beer is one of those kind of off products that isn't going to be, 200,000 Solaris per bottle. It's just going to be, it's a beer.
Yeah.
I also had the thought, it is totally possible spice beer is like fucking butterbeer or something. It's just like a gimmick for tourists. Like we have these off-world people coming to Arrakis and you're like, I have a spice beer. Whoa, it's spice. And you're like, this is suspiciously cheap. And is that natty ice with cinnamon?
Duncan just got twisted off natty.
He's got fucking blasted on some Miller Lite with
Oh
cinnamon.
my god, that's true.
I mean, Abu, did you try the blue milk? And
I did have the blue milk at Disney, and tasted suspiciously like regular milk with perhaps just some flavoring and blue coloring put in it.
You know what they say, Abu? A handful of blue milk, buy a house.
Could buy you a house on Tatooine.
Here you go.
That's an excellent point. I think those are some really excellent theories that could explain Roman's question here about the economics. Because, the reality is we don't know. We're never given like an indication of what the exact numbers and charts look like in the Imperium. Yeah. And so we can't just put like Solari amounts on any of this. We can't say spice is worth X Solaris per gram, or that spice beer will cost you $7.49 for a bottle or whatever. Yeah. That seems cheap, actually. New York prices.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Basic economics still applies to the Imperium, right? And so based on simple economics, we can make some safe assumptions. Scarcity creates value.
Right.
We all know this. Right. And spice comes from one planet in the entire galaxy. And thus, spice off-world is extremely scarce. And thus, that would inherently inflate the value. This reminds us, we were talking before the recording about indigenous peoples back in the 15th and 16th centuries who would have precious metals and golds. The Incans come to mind, right?
Yeah.
And how they were plundered by the Spanish conquistadors because the Spanish conquistadors valued this precious metal. And the Incans valued it as well, but they used it for a lot of things.
Right.
It wasn't just money and wealth. They used it to create religious artifacts and in their religious ceremonies.
And building. Yeah.
Exactly. And it was used in various ways, much like spices used in various ways on Arrakis. But to the Spanish conquistadors who came in, it was just dollar signs everywhere,
No, we want to take that temple and make it into little coins I can toss into a bag that I can
That's right.
Jingle around.
And then when I'm indecisive, I can just flip that coin.
Flip the coin, yeah.
and it can make a
Or if
decision
I'm trying to
for
give
me.
a menacing monologue, I can have a coin that I'm flipping, and I'm like, "Hey, Tony!"
Twirling
Yeah.
between my fingers. Yes, yeah. Obviously, some real world allegories there as well with the indigenous peoples and how they were conquered and their resources were used and abused.
Yeah. It almost sounds like something Frank was intentionally doing.
Interesting. You also made a really excellent point earlier when we were chatting about the Spacing Guild and their monopoly on transportation.
Yeah.
Again, applying just basic economics, when a monopoly exists, the guild can enforce any sort of tariff they want because fuck you, how are you moving this spice without us?
Right.
And so it's easy to imagine that spice on planet, without the necessary guild fees and transportation involved, would likely be cheaper
Right.
when it stayed on the planet Arrakis because it was sourced locally. But as soon as you have to transport hordes of spice, refined or unrefined or whatever form it may take, off planet, now you're accruing massive Spacing Guild tariffs and fees and transportation costs, which naturally, again, inflate the price.
Yeah, I think anybody who's tried to buy sick anime merch knows this intrinsically.
Yes.
You go to Japan,
yes.
you go into a place and they're like, "Oh yeah, this like incredible figurine, this is like $12." And you're like, "Whoa, that's pretty good." You try to order it when you're back home and it's like $70. You're like, "What the fuck, man?"
Exactly.
So just think spice equals anime figurines. Now, I'd also point out that like the Spacing Guild needs spice. So I imagine, this is again speculation, but I imagine the Spacing Guild takes a chunk of the actual material off of the commercial market for their continued. I don't imagine they're like buying spice from. No, like they can set the terms of these things. So then that also would constrain once it's leaving the planet. Once you're like, I'm going to ship it off planet, the sellable amount is even more scarce, and then that is driving the price up higher and higher.
That's right. Supply and demand, baby.
I think sometimes we're kind of tinfoil hatty. I feel like we've done a good job with this answer being very like
I agree.
rooted in real lore. So
absolutely,
Roman, hopefully that helps.
Real lore, otherwise known as history.
Otherwise
and
known
economics.
as economics and the Incans. Yeah. So Roman, hopefully that helps, and hopefully to everyone else that was fun. I am absolutely going to be thinking about Duncan just angrily chugging down some like,
my God, just Coronas, just cheap, shitty, awful
Corona's not bad.
I don't know Coronas.
Some Fosters. He's just like big cans of Fosters. Yeah.
Thank you, Roman, for the 2-part question. We love it. Sorry that it took us so long to respond. Moving on. Next email is from Hillary. This is actually also, we have 2 emails that pair well together. First one is from Hillary. Quote, what is the difference between Adab and the ancestral memories that a Reverend Mother attains during the Spice Agony? Is it just how they're achieved through the Spice Agony? If so, how is Adab achieved? Is it learned or studied during training? What does ancestral memory provide that Adab does not? Also, please, can we go for a pint sometime? End quote.
Okay, Hillary, yes. I think Hillary said she's from Ireland. I'm like, yes.
Right. We'd have to travel across the pond, but if we're ever there.
Yeah, 100%. And I fucking love Adab. It's so cool. I actually found on my laptop a like rough merch idea, like art design similar to the Kwisatz Haderach for Adab, because it's such an idea that I love.
Yeah.
So in the glossary at the end of the first book, Adab is defined as, quote, the demanding memory that comes upon you of itself, end quote. You're like, cool, that is vague as shit. Thank you, book. Now, we see this in action when Jessica is overcome with the Adab memory when speaking to Stilgar before they even get to, I believe, Sietch Tabr. This is like right before they're there. They're having their sort of one-on-one, although they both note that people are listening.
Yes.
Quote, her mind felt as though it had rolled over within her. She recognized the sensation with a quickening of pulse. Nothing in all the Bene Gesserit training carried such a signal of recognition. It could only be the Adab, the demanding memory that comes upon you of itself. She gave herself up to it, allowing the words to flow from her. End quote. Mm-hmm. And in that scene, she starts rattling off this like long and very precise religious call and response with the people in the area to pass this test and to demonstrate that
Yep.
she is a Reverend Mother in training for the Fremen, basically. So Adab sounds like a memory muscle reflex. This is something that sort of maybe it comes on you of itself. So this is happening without your conscious intention that you hone during Bene Gesserit training, just like you do with your physical body. You're honing your mind to be present and witness these things.
Right. Sort of a mental prana bindu.
Yes. Yeah, it seems so. And I've always understood it to be like, I'm a solid 80% confident that this is rooted in original lore, but I'll blanket this with, this might be misremembered or Leo speculation. I'll say my understanding of Adab for a long time has been the Bene Gesserit memorize, like the Mentats do, inhuman amounts of information. And the only way you can actually catalog all of that information and bring it up when it needs to be and be relevant is something like Adab. You cannot, as a human, have like billions of facts ready to go at a moment's notice. So instead, you have the demanding memory, which says, oh, this volume of the stuff you've memorized is going to be very important to you in this moment. And it shoots forward. And that's Adab.
Yeah. I love that.
That's been my understanding of it. I'm 80% sure that's based on something in the books.
Yeah. Even if that's a theory, that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
Right? The Bene Gesserit, of all people, would be training themselves to master long-term memory because us normal, regular, weak-ass humans are quite bad at long-term memory, right?
Yeah.
Like you, of course, remember things from long ago, but you mostly remember maybe how it felt or how it smelled, like very sensory things, rather than the exact facts and details of a memory from 20 years ago. So the Bene Gesserit naturally would want to be able to recall things perfectly from 20 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
And Adab is perhaps something they do in training in order to do that in times of stress or danger or necessity, as you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. So in this case with Stilgar, she's able to do this like very complex call and response where every word matters. Think about how she basically fumbled her way through the interaction with Shadout Mapes fucking by luck. Doesn't even know whatever. Here, she's like word for word. She knows exactly what she's doing. And that's the power of Adab.
Yeah, definitely. Now, on the other hand, there's ancestral memory, the other part of the equation from Hillary's question. And ancestral memory, as we understand it, is passed down through Reverend Mothers and, as we know, is unlocked by surviving a spice agony and is very much a conscious thing. It is a kind of memory that the Reverend Mothers can then tap into at will when they need it or want it. And these memories appear to be an accumulation of knowledge and memories and skills passed down from Reverend Mother to Reverend Mother across many generations. And it's not necessarily just like a fact that you studied many years ago that's now being jolted into your memory during a stressful situation.
A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Oh, shit.
You know, right. Exactly. You remembering that equation from AP stats or something from 10 years ago. Ancestral memory appears to be, past Reverend Mother so-and-so was a statistician and thus can just tell me the equation whenever I need to. This, however, opens up a huge can of worms about ancestral memory and actually leads us into another email from a listener that ties very nicely with Hillary's question. Yeah. So Liam Venerholm asked us this about Bene Gesserit genetic memory. Quote, do Reverend Mothers have access to the memories of every female ancestor of theirs? Or do they just have access to the memories of their mother, their mother's mother, their mother's mother, and so on? The difference here is that they either do or don't have access to the females on their father's side, or even their mother's father's side. End quote.
Yeah. We have, over the last 4 years, gotten this question in a few different permutations. And I've even taken, there was one point where I spent about like 30 minutes writing out an answer to it. And another person sent me a diagram he drew to explain. You know, it is complicated to answer because although Frank has been very intentional with some elements of his universe, this tends to be one of the softer ones that seems to have a lot more room for contradiction. And on the surface level, we'll just say it is often referenced as genetic memory, and it's not qualifying genetic memory on your mother's side. It's your female ancestors. So on a surface level, you say, okay, your other memory is your female ancestors. Done.
Yep.
And sure enough, we have examples of this happening throughout the first 4 books. There is also like memory transfer, which is kind of a different thing because like Romallo and Jessica aren't necessarily related at all, but Romallo like forehead to forehead gives Jessica her other memories. And Jessica's like, yo, she had a hot fucking lover. Oh, god damn, that dude was virile. So now they're not related to, so there's this other thing that can be done. And without saying too much, we will see more of that in books 5 and 6, because if you couldn't guess, Heretics and Chapter House, kind of about the Bene Gesserit.
Yeah.
But this also raises an even more complicated question, which is like, at the moment of Jessica's awakening, and she says, I think there's a line about having all this new information to catalog. Did she actually get her ancestors' memories?
Right.
Or did she just get Romallo and the person before Romallo and the person before Romallo, the people who've done this like memory transfer all the way down the line? And it is unclear.
Super unclear.
You would think it would be like, yeah, she's a Reverend Mother. She's a fully awakened Reverend Mother. Is it though?
Super unclear and in fact contradictory across the books.
Yeah. I thought this was absolutely shocking. I was so much more confident that I knew how this worked than the primary canon seems to be.
That's right. Yeah. And I think to your point, we've gotten this question in many permutations across the course of Gom Jabbar, and our own understanding of it has grown in complexity and in doubt, frankly. Like at first I was like, oh, duh, genetic memory, duh, easy answer, whatever. And the more research we do and the more we read these books and the more book clubs we get through, the more confused I get about other memory because it seems to be extremely unclear and complex. A scholar and a gentle person on Reddit, who we've referenced many times on this podcast.
I've messaged them. We've talked.
I don't know how to say this username. Maxime
Diver. I think it was a reference to a person. We talked about their username at one point.
Gotcha. We'll just reference this user as Maxime for simplicity's sake. But they have posted many times on the Dune Reddit about many topics, and they go into extreme detail, and they're pulling quotes from every book. It's incredible stuff. And they posted something about ancestral memory that we wanted to touch on in this response to Liam, because I think it's super relevant and kind of it unpeels the onion of how complex this all gets.
Yeah.
So Maxime posits in this very lengthy and detailed post about Reverend Mothers.
With receipts, by the way. Like Maxime always brings like, here's this excerpt.
Yeah, totally. A very detailed post here. Maxime posits that Reverend Mothers only inherit each other's memories to pass down the generations. Through that logic, Jessica would have only inherited Romallo's memory and Romallo's memory's memory and memory down the line. Right. Anyone who passed things down all the way up to Romallo and Jessica. They do not, Maxime says, unlock an infinite stream of all genetic memory once they pass the agony. And the only people seemingly to actually do this are Ghanima and Leto.
Yeah, I think also probably Alia, because like Alia talks about the baby on Bela Tagus, and like I think the preborn, like the very earliest preborn people potentially do, based on what we can read from the books.
Yeah.
But that's also why, note, Ghanima and Leto can speak in ancient languages that no one can understand, even with like Jessica around. She doesn't know the language they're speaking.
She doesn't, right? And seemingly you would think, okay, if Jessica can tap into her ancestors that speak French from old Terra, why wouldn't she understand what Ghanima and Leto are saying in French to each other? She doesn't. So this supports Maxime's theory here that they don't unlock every genetic memory down the whole line, all the way back to the beginning of genetic time. Ghanima and Leto and Alia are the special ones who do this. Maxime takes it even further, though, and theorizes that Paul himself doesn't have access to all of his genetic memories.
Yeah.
Paul's abilities, throughout many quotes in the books, seem to be more forward-leaning than backward-looking.
Yeah, or like presence and forward. It's like he is aware of the highliners in space above the planet.
Yep.
He does not immediately go, oh my God, old Terra, hell yeah. And it's funny because the more you start looking for examples of Paul referencing ancient memories, the more you're like, oh,
there are none.
Oh, shit.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, Paul, do you even know who Beethoven is?
Do you even fuck with Caesar? I don't know.
Do you? Right. I mean, Leto too fucks with Bach, right?
Yeah.
Paul doesn't know who Bach is.
Yeah. Fucking idiot. Uncultured.
Fucking idiot. Uncultured swine. So I'm loving Maxime's theory here that Paul himself is sort of this like quote unquote incomplete Kwisatz Haderach, right? He doesn't have the abilities that Ganima and Leto do, probably because he comes a generation early. And most of his abilities are actually based on prescience and looking ahead and looking at infinite possibilities, which of course is still very powerful stuff. But it isn't quite the like Super Saiyan 2 level that Ganima and Leto and Alia achieve, perhaps.
Right.
Now, Maxime quotes a bunch of these contradictions as well, but throughout the book, Frank himself contradicts and changes his own definition of what Reverend Mother abilities are in regards to ancestral and genetic memory and what exactly they do and don't have access to. So this is a very difficult answer to nail down in response to Liam's question about what happens when you pass the spice agony. What do you have access to? And I think it's open to a lot of interpretation. And I think Frank himself was really kind of playing fast and loose with these ideas. It's hard to apply sort of hard science and hard genetic science to this idea that is very much like a soft sci-fi idea, I think. But huge props to Maxime Dever on Reddit, who is truly incredible. And their encyclopedic knowledge of this book inspires us to this day.
Yeah. It is funny because also you commented earlier in the script something and linked to a source. That source was also Maxime. I think if you are out there Googling questions and finding answers on Reddit, just take a moment and look at the username. It is shocking to me how many like really hard to poke holes in answers have come from Maxime. So anyway.
Yeah. And Maxime, if you're listening, please come on the show.
I've messaged them. We could absolutely bring them on. Or maybe. I don't know if they'd be interested.
I mean, maybe they want to stay anonymous.
Yeah.
And we respect
that.
And
also, when we messaged it was, I think it might have been 2020, 2021. I was like, well, I'm doing a podcast about Dune. And they were like, okay. I was like,
right. We weren't quite established.
And I was like, oh, man. I also realized, like, yeah, coming out off the streets, like making a podcast out of a thing that they know so much about. I'm like, oh, I'm so annoying. Ah, damn it. They're so cool. I'm so annoying.
Maxime, be our friend, please.
All right. Well, we've got one last question here. And
yes.
This is perhaps the hardest hitting question of all.
Indeed.
Deepest, most kind of,
I had a tough time with this one.
It's hard. And I think listeners, if you ask yourself this question, you're going to learn something about yourself, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, truly.
So this comes from Aoife. Aoife wrote, quote, dream blunt rotation with all Dune characters, end quote. Now, this was a delightful question to get because Abu, you very quickly pinged me and you were like, I don't smoke weed. I don't know.
Right.
And I realized for the very first time that if you ever have asked someone like blunt rotation, you've heard people talk about that, like, oh, what's your dream blunt rotation? It is a very similar energy to like, who would you want to have at a sleepover? And you know, at a sleepover with your friends in like middle school, high school, where you know that you should be asleep because it's like 2 a.m. and you got like shit in the morning. You're all like in your sleeping bags on the floor of whoever's. And someone's like, yeah, but like, what even is good? And you're like, yo, that's a good question, you know? And I'm realizing that is like one for one, the same energy, the same vibe. So approaching the question that way, and for you out there in listener land, it's kind of a fun thing to think about. Not so much who would you do marijuana with, but who would you want to have some like deep, philosophical, just chatting late into the night, that sort of energy. And I'll let you kick us off, Abu. Who's your dream spice blunt rotation with all Dune characters.
Yeah, this was interesting because I did message you and I was like, hey man, I don't know how to answer this. I don't smoke. I'm an extremely square and boring person. I don't smoke or do any drugs or anything. So how do I answer this? And I think the lens that you've explained to kind of consider this through, the spirit of the question, thinking of it as like a sleepover with some good friends talking late into the night. That was a fun way for me to consider it. So that's how I'll answer.
Sure.
Two characters immediately came to mind for me. Thufir Hawat and Bronzo FX.
Excellent.
Just without thinking, I was like, who are just the first names that come to
Boom.
mind when I think of this? Boom, boom. Thufir and Bronzo. Why Thufir? Genuinely, I think he would have a lot of fun stories, right? He's been around with House Atreides for 3 generations. He holds the questionable title of best mentat in the galaxy. And I think it would just genuinely, late at night, when he's sort of opening up and the guardrails are down, I think he would just have a lot of really interesting stories to share. Maybe he'd spill a state secret or two here and there.
Yeah, for sure.
And it would just be really interesting to maybe see the world through the best mentat in the galaxy's eyes, right? How does he even view and interpret the world?
Yeah.
Is it all calculations? How much emotion is in there? It would be, I think, a really enlightening conversation.
Yo, Thufir, can you calculate for me the chance of me getting some bitches? Thufir's like,
that's not how that works.
it's not high. It's not high.
Ouch. Ouch.
Fair play.
Thufir, that hurts.
Fair play.
And then, of course, Bronzo Avix. That was an easy one. We are Bronzo stands on here. We're not shy about that, about loving Bronzo on this podcast. I think he would be absolutely hilarious to chat to.
Yeah.
Bronzo clearly has no filter. Bronzo clearly can't help himself. He's a full-on gossip. And I think late into the night, chatting with him, joking around, would be a blast. Mm-hmm. He'd be throwing shade left and right, gossiping about every
And here's another fucking thing.
Imperium.
This guy...
Let me tell you about this guy, huh?
I'm a historian. I know all this shit.
So I think Thufir would be enlightening. And I think Bronzo would just be a blast to hang out with. And there would be a lot of belly laughs with Bronzo, I imagine. He almost kind of gives me like Andy Cohen vibes, almost. So those are my 2 picks.
Awesome.
For Dream Blunt rotation / late night sleepover with Dune characters. What about you?
Well, I don't smoke, but I have been known to eat a gummy or 2 now and then. And honestly, there's a few characters I'd love to hang out with, chat late into the night, kind of just shoot the breeze. First person that came to mind, honestly, Leto 2, God Emperor himself. Full worm mode, guaranteed. I think in his cozy little meeting room where most of his body's in darkness, but then we're chilling in the center with the pillows. Yeah. I feel like that would be really cozy. And dude's got sandworm-sized perspective. And he's dry humor, sarcastic, he's witty, he's funny. I think it'd be very fun. Similar to what you're saying about Thufir, I want to see how he sees the world. And I want to glean a bit of that. I might also have some performance anxiety of I want to say things that he thinks is cool. But considering he tends to appreciate people who are kind of just present in the moment, I'm I think we could get along. I think that'd be fun. More off the cuff, I was yo, B-Jazz.
Oh!
B-Jazz would be fun as shit, dude. I mean, first of all, he's Zen Sunni philosopher. He's got his rhyming riddles and his chaotic energy. He would be so much fun to just sit down and be spit at me, dude. Let's talk about it.
Wow.
B-Jazz would be fun.
That's a good one. Damn.
And then I wanted to do a third one. And my first thought was Gentle Hui Nari. But then I was oh no, I would catch feelings. She's too perfect.
So true. That's a recipe for falling deeply in love.
Yeah. So instead, I'll say Gurney Halleck.
Nice.
You chose one of Paul's father figures. I'll choose one of the other ones. Gurney Halleck, his experience, his diplomacy, his wit. Dude's a singer. I could be play me a song, Gurney. And then he's mood. That whole scene. I feel he's very good at pondering life's mysteries. I bet he's got all sorts of cool quotations and references we could talk about and analyze. And maybe he could play Balasset. I'll play Cajon, or I'll play we could have a little jam sesh middle of the chat. Sick. Yeah.
Yeah. Those are great picks. Yeah, I think I expected you to have at least one musically minded person in here, just because that's so much your vibe.
Yeah.
And I think you'd have fun with Gurney playing a couple of strings on the
I
balisette.
also thought like maybe Scytale, but like I would be too. I feel like if you're high, like
That would get weird
someone's
fast, I
face
think.
moving would be like, no, I don't like this.
Yeah, that might be too freaky.
Anyway, thank you so much, Aoife. Excellent question. We love the silly
Yeah.
questions as well. They're super fun.
We do. And thank you to everyone who wrote in, your emails, your Discord messages, your smoke signals. We loved them all. Of course, we couldn't get to all of them. There were so many. But as always, we will have future mailbags. And so hopefully we'll get around to it next time. But that wraps it up for today's mailbag. Before we let you go, a couple of very quick reminders here. The 2 best ways to support us is to become a patron and to get yourself some Dune-themed swag from our merch store. You can see those links in the show notes below. Those 2 things help us keep the show running, and we appreciate your support.
Indeed, we do. And we love to hear from you. So if you want to add your email to the list that we will respond to within the next 2 calendar years,
two
calendar years, upgrading it today, gomjabarpodcast@gmail.com is the place to reach out to us. We love your questions, your thoughts. Pictures of your cute pets are lovely.
Yeah.
And of course, even just some nice words are lovely. As we were going through the emails for today, it was delightful. You know, we get some really great questions. What a great question. We can use that. Excellent. But also sometimes I'd see an email and I open it up and it's just like, you guys are awesome. Love your show. And it's like, oh, that's lovely.
Yeah,
so
then I'd cry.
Feel free to send us anything you want. gomjabarpodcast@gmail.com.
That's right.
I can't wait for the inevitable spice beers available at whatever Dune Sci-Fi Park is going to be opened after the trilogy.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That's right.
Probably just natty ice. And
Yep.
there's a lot of
Natty
alcohol-free
ice.
beers actually now these days.
Oh,
So they could probably
okay.
do something like that to make it also more like open to people.
More accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that idea. Oh my gosh. Now this is opening a can of worms about what I'd want in a Dune theme park.
Oh my God.
You know, come to Arrakis and experience it firsthand.
Bonus questions. Yeah. What would the exhibits be? They'd have to have like a sandworm
Oh,
ride.
the ride, a sandworm
The
ride.
sandworm
That's
roller coaster.
exactly what I was going to say.
Oh my
Yep.
gosh. And you're in a harness, but you have to hold the 2
You have to hold the 2 things.
Oh,
you know,
shit.
it's safe. It's safe. You're not going anywhere.
goggles.
But you still hold the
blast you
2
with sand.
things. Yep.
It's like the
Yep.
log ride where everyone's on the bridge and it like splashes the water at the bridge, but it's all sand.
It's all sand. It actually kind of hurts. You're like, this is uncomfortable. Why am I here?
It's rough. Of course, it gets everywhere. This sucks. Well, friends, there is no real ending. It's just the place where you stop the recording. But this podcast is always one step beyond logic, so help spread the word of Muad'Dib and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party. We're also on TikTok at Gomjabar Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, whoever controls the podcast controls the universe. We'll see you on the golden path.